when you're able to meet with a patient, even right after the procedure, but then see them a week, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, 6 months later, and to see how well they're doing, and to see that they're engaged in treatment, to see that they're reestablished connections with their family and are doing well functionally, it's really quite amazing.
Welcome to Curing with Sound, a podcast presented by the Focus Ultrasound Foundation. I'm your host, Allison Preston Smith. Dr. James Mahoney is an associate professor and clinical neuropsychologist at the West Virginia University School of Medicine and Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute. He has spent over 20 years studying addiction and learning how to better assess and treat substance use disorders. Several of his studies have been funded by the National Institute of Drug Abuse, including one that explores various forms of neuromodulation, including deep brain stimulation and focus ultrasound for the treatment of opiate addiction and other drug addictions. He also received a prestigious research award, allowing him to focus on developing new studies in this area. Throughout his career, Dr. Mahoney has published over 80 scientific papers, contributed to books on addiction treatment, served as co-investigator on several NIH-funded grants, and presented his work at major international conferences. Dr. Mahoney will be joining the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia this summer as an associate professor, and will also serve as director of neuromodulation research in the department, leading efforts in the development of various forms of neuromodulation for addiction and other psychiatric disorders. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
What made you interested in researching addiction treatments?
Yeah, so I first started doing different types of research for addiction about 20 years ago or so. Started off with medication development trials, working out at UCLA, and later went on to continue doing that work down at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. What we were focusing on then were investigating different medications for stimulant use disorder, so for methamphetamine and cocaine use disorder. And then since coming to West Virginia University and the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute approximately 8 years ago, began looking at different forms of what we call neuromodulation for various addictions. Obviously, the opioid epidemic and the overdose epidemic has been very widespread throughout the entire country. But what I wanted to do after I finished up my fellowship in clinical neuropsychology at the University of Virginia, I wanted to go really into the belly of the beast, and that was West Virginia. Obviously, the highest overdose rates in the country, and to see so many people that are afflicted and are suffering from addiction in that area, I knew that that's where I wanted to go.
Was that your first experience with focus ultrasound, or had you heard of it earlier?
I had heard of it earlier. So being from Charlottesville, the Charlottesville area, I knew about the Focused Ultrasound Foundation when I was here on fellowship. And I had heard of it, but I didn't really get a sense of its potential and really what it can do for addiction until I got out there. So probably about 6 years ago or so, being involved in some of the high-intensity focused ultrasound studies and the clinical usage of it for Parkinson's disease and essential tremor, and seeing some of the low intensity work with opening up the blood-brain barrier with Alzheimer's. I didn't really see the potential for what it could do for addiction until, about 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, that's so interesting. And is there a particular part of the brain that you're focusing on when you are doing this research with substance use disorders?
There is. So the area that we focus on is called the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is the center of the reward circuitry. It's associated with craving. It leads to very well connected to the frontal lobes, which is involved with impulsivity and inhibitory control. So we really consider it the center of the reward circuitry, which is why that's the area that we're targeting.
In 2021, you led a pioneering study using low-intensity focus ultrasound in the treatment of substance use disorders. So can you tell us more about this study and your findings?
Definitely. So when we first started looking at neuromodulation, Ali Rezai, a neurosurgeon who leads the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute, we wrote a grant looking at deep brain stimulation for refractory opioid use disorder. Refractory opioid use disorder meaning that it's individuals that have, tried time and time again to the standard of care treatments and haven't had success. So we started a study looking at deep brain stimulation, which involves the implantation of electrodes in that same area of the brain and the nucleus accumbens. And we had very positive results. And what I was thinking at that point was, well, this is great. Very happy to see that it can help these individuals that have severe opioid and other substance use disorders. But when thinking about scalability and how, when you look at the numbers across the nation of how many people are affected by refractory substance use disorder, how can we get this out to the masses? It's not really practical and it's not as scalable given that it takes implantable hardware and then the maintenance. So we wanted to find something that would work similarly, but be more scalable. We know that transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is non-invasive, so that's how it's different from DBS, from deep brain stimulation. It's had success in reducing substance use and substance craving for a variety of substances. However, it's unable to really target those deep areas of the brain, such as the nucleus accumbens, those areas of the brain that are so critical. It's unable to target them with really great precision. So focused ultrasound, though, you're able to get to those deep subcortical areas of the brain, but you're able to do so in a non-invasive fashion. So when we wrote the protocol initially back in 2020 and went to the FDA, that was really the main reason, is because we saw this as a way. It hadn't been looked at before. Focused ultrasound hadn't been looked at yet for addiction, but we saw that as a way that we could really investigate it and then hopefully get it out to the masses.
What were some of the safety considerations that you had to account for in these studies?
Yeah, so initially, since it had never been looked at before, obviously, when we worked with the FDA and coming up with the protocol, we wanted to start with a very low dose because it had never been looked at for addiction before, just to really look at the initial safety profile, as well as the feasibility. We wanted to be sure that we're able to keep participants engaged in the treatment, and we want to keep them engaged in the follow-up so that we could really monitor the safety profile over the length of the trial. And the trial had a 90-day follow-up, was the final follow-up in the initial studies. So that was, the main thing that we wanted to look at, was to make sure with low intensity focused ultrasound, we wanted to make sure that we weren't creating any sort of lesions or ablation that you would find with high intensity, which is why we started with a lower dose to start. And then after we worked with the FDA and as I mentioned, completed 2 participants, it was safe. And then we moved into a slightly higher dose with another 2 participants, which was also safe. And then we wrote a different protocol in follow-up to look at bilateral, so targeting both the left and the right nucleus accumbens simultaneously and at a slightly higher dose. And that's the study that we recently published.
Are you seeing differences in the brain before and after, or is it more with the behavior?
So both. So we want to certainly investigate both. Behavior in real time is much easier to look at. Where we have, we also do several MRIs and PET scans to see if there's any changes occurring in brain that are measurable. But behaviorally, that's the real marker for us to see if it may be an effective treatment. So first off, the safety, we want to monitor adverse events, make sure that there's no changes behaviorally that are negative, that would create a side effect profile that wouldn't be ideal. And then also looking at things like the main thing that we're looking at is substance craving. So what we want to do is measure to see if the craving before the focused ultrasound treatment is higher than when we provide the focused ultrasound treatment. And then we want to see if we're able to reduce the craving, because we know that craving is one of the primary risk factors for relapse and continued substance use.
Mm-hmm. And what does that look like? Is it a certain area of the brain lighting up when they have that craving, or is it just, the patient reporting thoughts of using a particular substance?
That's a great question. So there is a few different ways that we're able to measure that. I could say behaviorally, what we do is we use a procedure called a cue reactivity paradigm. So we expose the individual to pictures and images of drugs and people using drugs. We're able to tailor it to the individual. And then we measure their cravings. So we'll ask them, they use a button box, and they're presented with questions on a screen. How much are you craving opioids right now? Or how much are you craving methamphetamine? So what we want to do is we want to raise their craving levels initially. And then after the treatment, we want to once again run that same procedure, show them the images. And then we want to see if we're able to reduce their self-reported craving after the treatment to see if there's an effect there.
Are there specific criteria for the patients who are participating in these clinical trials?
Currently, yes. So we want to focus on individuals. There's a lot of medical inclusion-exclusion criteria. And then there's also, we want to make sure that these individuals have severe substance use disorder. So we want to focus on individuals that are refractory and that they've tried several different treatments before, but haven't had success. And we look at focused ultrasound treatment not to be a standalone treatment. We're very careful using the word cure. And when we go over the consent process with the participants, we talk about this as not being we're not trying to just flip the addiction switch off. This is a treatment that is supposed to be used in combination with a standard of care. So we want to make sure that participants understand and the public understand that this isn't just, you come in for the focused ultrasound treatment and then you leave and, the addiction is gone and you never have to worry about it again. This is really meant to be what we call an adjunctive treatment. So we want it to be used with medication for opioid use disorder. So buprenorphine is an example of that. And then also the behavioral treatment. So working with therapists, working with in group therapy, individual therapy, attending peer support groups in their home environment, so NA and AA. So this is really just meant to augment the treatment that they've tried before, but just haven't found complete success.
Beyond craving reduction, are there any other outcomes you're seeing in the patients that undergo this treatment?
We are. So when it comes to craving, we know that craving is very much associated with things like anxiety and depression, and also in turn is involved with thinking and decision making, as I mentioned earlier, with like inhibitory control, with those frontal lobe, the front of the brain functions. So what we have noticed is that symptoms of anxiety and depression, they also reduce along with the craving. So we're able to target multiple behavioral symptoms. And they're all intertwined because a lot of times when we look at craving, it's in response to a stressor, it's in response to anxiety. So if we're able to reduce all of that, we're able to give the patient the best potential for success.
You're working alongside these patients for months. So what is it like seeing the evolution of how the treatment is impacting them from start to finish?
In all honesty, each and every patient's story is memorable because seeing and it's an extensive screening process where we're not only doing all the medical screening procedures to ensure that the patient is eligible, but it's getting such a strong background and history and seeing kind of what led them to down their path and to see the addiction and how that's impacted their life. So when you're able to meet with a patient, even right after the procedure, but then see them a week, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, 6 months later, and to see how well they're doing and to see that they're engaged in treatment, to see that they're reestablished connections with their family and are doing well functionally, it's really quite amazing because you see them pretty much what would be said at their worst and what they would consider to be their worst. And to see that they're able to get back to living and really functioning in society again is really one of the most rewarding things for me and the rest of the team.
Have you seen an increase in the number of people who want to participate in clinical trials for addiction?
So definitely over time, we've seen an increase in patients that are going through treatment, either within our own what we call the Center for Hope and Healing. It's part of WVU. It's behavioral medicine, and it's our residential treatment center. So when patients come through our residential treatment center, they hear from other patients. They hear stories. They hear in the meetings in the environment, the AA and NA meetings that I referenced earlier. They hear patients talk about how successful it was, and really to see kind of what the potential is. So I think over time, we've had a lot more interest And we really want to just make sure that patients know that not every patient is going to have the same response, and it's really an individual journey. And there's no quick fix to any of the addiction treatment, and we know that, and we really want to reinforce that with the patients. So we spend a lot of time up front with them, talking to them about that, about how this isn't just, as I mentioned, with the flipping the addiction switch, and really make sure they're on board that this is going to continue to be a lifelong journey for them. And this is just meant to make it a little bit easier for them.
Yeah. You're also using focused ultrasound neuromodulation to treat severe opioid use disorder, and you and your team just published results from a study in the Journal of Biological Psychiatry. Can you tell us more about that?
I can. So with that study, that was in 8 participants with severe opioid use disorder. So these are individuals that had tried multiple different types of addiction treatment in the past, inpatient, residential, outpatient, but never had success. They all had primary opioid use disorder. However, they all had co-occurring substance use disorders. And that's one thing that really highlights the importance and the critical need for a treatment that doesn't just focus on one substance alone. Because when it comes to addiction, polysubstance use is really more the norm than the exception. So especially with the amounts of stimulants and methamphetamine and other addictive substances that are on the street right now, by focusing on the center of the reward circuitry, you're not just getting at one specific substance. You're not just targeting one specific substance, but really the addiction process as a whole. So all the participants that were in our studies were polysubstance use disorder. And the findings were that, first off, the primary outcome was safety. We showed that it was safe and feasible as well. And then behaviorally and potential for the effectiveness of the treatment, we found that there was reductions in craving. We found that there was reductions in use of various substances, and that these changes were prolonged. For the primary endpoint was 90 days following the treatment. But we continue to follow participants to current day. So I can say qualitatively there's been a reduction overall in their substance use. And then we found that with treatment engagement, they stay more engaged in treatment. We find that their subjective report of being more engaged with family and individuals, seeking employment for the first time in several years and maintaining that employment and seeking relationships with their family and spending more time with their family and friends, and really just getting back to the life that they've always wanted.
Would it be possible for patients to get future focused ultrasound treatments if they find themselves struggling with substance use again?
One of the great things about the research line with focused ultrasound right now is that it's really in its infancy for addiction. So finding out if repeated treatments of focused ultrasound would be beneficial. For example, we know that with transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is approved for depression, for refractory treatment-resistant depression, we know that it's very effective at the beginning. And then after several months, sometimes those depression symptoms come back. So they have what they call a maintenance session where they come in and they get another TMS treatment, and then they find yet again that the depression symptoms reduce. So the potential that that this will be just kind of a one and done type treatment, it may be possible for some folks. But I think looking into whether or not those maintenance treatments are needed is something that's still yet to be learned. But it's definitely very exciting. And I think that there's still so much to be learned and so much to be investigated and really optimized so that we can make this as scalable as possible and get it out to everybody that needs it.
What's next for you and your team? Are you working on other studies right now, or is there another area of research that you're interested in?
So we currently have a randomized sham-controlled trial looking at focused ultrasound for refractory opioid use disorder in follow-up to the open-label studies, including the one that we just published. So we're currently obviously staying within the addiction realm. We're also expanding to look at focused ultrasound for other substance use disorders, including methamphetamine. As I mentioned before, several of our participants, most of our participants use multiple substances. So even if they don't use opioids, but they use methamphetamine or they use cocaine, we want to see if for those populations, if there's similar results. We expect there to be, but we need to demonstrate that. And then also looking at focused ultrasound for other behavioral disorders. So we currently have an ongoing study looking at focused ultrasound for binge eating disorder. It's a pilot study, open label study, very positive preliminary findings. We plan on expanding to other psychiatric disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, and also staying within the behavioral addictions. I know when it comes to non-substance addictions, when we look at things like gambling, I think that's going to be even more and more problematic as the years pass with the accessibility. So this might be an additional treatment for those folks struggling from gambling as well.
What would you say to others about focused ultrasound?
I'd want everybody to know that there's scientists, there's clinicians, there's researchers that are out there working endlessly every day and really thinking outside the box. And when we find that something doesn't work, we try to find out why it doesn't. And we want to be able to give back and really treat the people who need it the most. A lot of times there's stigma that goes along with addiction, and patients sometimes aren't viewed the best by the community and by society. So we're trying to break that stigma and make people realize that it is a brain disease and that patients need help for addiction just like they need help for cancer or other medical diseases. So it's really, I'd like for everybody to know that there's folks out here like myself, like the rest of the team at WVU and RNI, that are really doing whatever we can to really push forward and conquer the addiction epidemic. And with that, I ask that the listeners do what they can to stay hopeful. I know that things look bleak at times when dealing with addiction, but you have people that are very dedicated, such as myself and the team and others throughout the nation, that are very dedicated to doing whatever we can to move the field forward and really conquering the addiction epidemic in the best and most efficient way possible.
And how can our listeners keep up with you?
You can go to the West Virginia University and Rockefeller Neuroscience webpage, and then hopefully we'll be spreading the word with our publications and press releases as well.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mahoney, for all of your important work, especially in this area of addiction. What you're doing is helping so many people, and we're just really grateful to hear about all the developments going on in the field.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on today, and I appreciate everything.
This episode of Curing with Sound has been presented by the Focus Ultrasound Foundation. If you'd like to learn more about Focus Ultrasound or the Foundation, visit our website at fussfoundation.org. You can also sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media. Be sure to subscribe to the Curing with Sound podcast so you don't miss the latest information about Focus Ultrasound. You can also rate and review the show.